Welcome back. Now with these response videos, what I usually do is I record the introduction, the response section and the outro separately, which is indeed what I've done here, but it's now a week later since I recorded them and the introduction and the outro have had issues. There were some slight sound issues as well with the main response section, but I was able to pair those together, I think, pretty much seamlessly, but the introduction and the outro were a dead loss. So now it's a week later since I recorded those. I'm currently working on the editing and I found that out, so here's the introduction again. So someone sent me this video asking me to do a response on it. It's called How Trying to Solve Death Makes Life Here and Now Worse by Michael Shermer from the Big Think YouTube channel. Now since I'm recording this intro a week later, I'm not going to say I haven't seen it before, but at the time of the recording I hadn't seen it before. So here's my response to that video, and I'm going to have to watch it again post-editing because now I have to re-record the outro.
Yeah, Ray Kurzweil, I've met Ray several times.
I don't know who Ray Kurzweil is, so I might have to have a look up after this, just out of interest.
He's a super good guy. I like him a lot, and I'm glad he's out there doing it. In this sense, I'm not skeptical in a cynical way, like I hope that those singularity people are wrong. No, I hope they're right. I hope he does it. I hope he lives forever because that means I may have a shot at it. Whatever.
I wouldn't want to live forever. Imagine, at least in terms of life as we understand it, I mean, living 80 years is a long time. Living 120 years, or 127 I think is the longest a human's ever lived, is a long time. Imagine living 1,000 years. Imagine living 2,000 years, or thereabouts when recorded time first, or when time was first recorded. Now imagine living 10,000, 100,000, a million, a billion, a trillion years. I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that at all. And if we're talking about living forever, living for an infinite amount of time, that is not something I would want, I must say. I don't think anybody would want to live forever.
Whatever that would even mean, living forever. Okay, and so when people like Ray say to me, Shermer, don't you want to live 500 years, 1,000 years? It's like, listen, I'm 63. Just get me to like 80 without, my brain going crazy and I'm losing my mind and Alzheimer's and senility, and get me to 100 without cancer, and get.
If you had the ability to live, as Dr. Shermer is saying here, for as long as you like in a healthy, happy way, then that's different than being forced to live forever. If you could choose a time where you think, I've had enough, but then it's difficult because what then would you kind of be enforcing yourself to live forever? Because would you be able to push that button that ends your life? It's a difficult one, I suppose, to really conceptualize what that would be like, because I think it would be, you'd have issues with overpopulation for sure, but I don't know if I'd ever be able to push that button, even though I'd probably reach a stage where I was so bored with life and I've lived fine 500 years, 1,000 years. I'm so fed up now with life, but I don't want to push that button because I don't want to die, because that's the innate fear of humanity. So I think if that was the case, A, you'd struggle with complete overpopulation, and B, there'd be a mental health crisis because people would be depressed, severely depressed of life, of just living and not being able to press that button. And, the only way I think that people would end up being able to push that button would be if they're so depressed through constant living of life that they would become suicidal as a result. It's a difficult one to really fathom what that would be like. I don't imagine it'd be very positive.
Get me to 120 without being bedridden, just one step at a time, one problem at a time. That's how progress really happens, incrementally, slowly. Not this grand, let's aim for utopia. I mean, aim for it, fine, but just take it one step at a time. Cancer, there's like 50 different cancers that kill people. Just tackle them one by one. Heart disease, Alzheimer's and senility. Just solve those problems, and because we know that the human body is so complex that if you live to 150 or 200, there may be other things that happen we don't even know yet. I mean, most people 500 years ago had no idea about Alzheimer's, other than the handful of people that seem to have lost their memories. But now we realize, because so many of us live that long. Okay, so that's the problem with
Alzheimer's is something that terrifies me, but I wonder if It only terrifies me because I currently don't have it and have the cognition to realise what it means. I wonder, even though Alzheimer's is of course a terrible disease from the outside observer, I wonder what it would be like experientially to have Alzheimer's. I imagine in the early stages it's very frustrating, but as it develops, I wonder if it wouldn't almost be peaceful because you're forced to live in the moment. It's just one of those things that I've often wondered about. Obviously, it'd be much better if it didn't exist, but then I wonder, is it actually such a negative experience for those that are living with it once it gets to that level where you're forced to live in the moment? I don't know. It's certainly very difficult to live with someone with Alzheimer's, but to actually live with Alzheimer's yourself, it's very interesting. I wouldn't want to experiment and get it myself to find out, though, I must say.
With that is too utopian in their thinking. Just incremental steps. And then second, my skeptical alarms always go off when the chief proponent of an idea that's going to be the next big thing always says it's in our generation. You know, every religious leader and cult leader in history has always said it's going to happen now, in our generation. Because
that's the way that you garner the most followers and the most, as a result, income for your cult or religion. This is for those that are, deliberately practicing religion or a cult for that purpose. Many millions of people are genuinely religious because that's what they believe and they believe it's right. I'm not amongst them, but I can understand why, and I can see the benefits in the communityism of being in a religion, and that it's very comforting to think that our life is looked after, etc. But for this, saying deliberately for the purpose of gaining wealth and followers and power, saying that these things are going to happen in our lifetime is how, if it's happening in our lifetime, we need to be prepared for it now. So you need to come and join me and listen to me and do exactly what I say. Otherwise you will suffer as a result within your lifetime. It's a very clever ploy, at least conceptually, as I would infer that to be.
All the way back to Jesus, who said, "There are some standing here before me now who will not see the end of time before I return." Okay, so and we're still waiting. When Ray,
I don't know if Jesus said that. I've never read the Bible. I wouldn't really consider reading the Bible because it's not the original. It's not what Jesus said. It would be very, very, very difficult, I think, to claim that it is exactly what Jesus said, because there's been so much time and so many revisions and been passed through so many cultures and so many languages and so many language systems. We aren't alive in ancient Hebrewic culture, so we don't have the references for what they would understand, and the metaphors that they would understand, we haven't got a clue what they'd be talking about in the language that they were written in back before our current intelligence of science and the world exists. So what they were saying would be so far removed from how we would understand it now that the only way to really know what Jesus said and what he meant by that would be to know the context surrounding what he was saying, which would mean you'd have to live back in that time with that culture. So, which is why I always say, I struggle to see why people believe the Bible to be a true account of how life is now, because it's changed. And it's gone through all these changes and these cultures and these interpretations and these amendments from rulers and things throughout the years. There's no way it's anything like what it was originally intended to be, in terms of probability, as far as I can see.
He says it's going to happen in 2040. It's within our lifetime. Ray, what if it's 2140? I know you're doing all the blood cleansing, but you're not going to make it, like another century now. And
it's an estimate, and as science develops, science changes, and we don't know until we continue with that. So I'm assuming, from what Michael's saying about this Ray guy, I can't remember what he said his last name was. It sounds like he's working on trying to get humanity to live for a much longer time by whatever means he is. So, the more he obviously works at that, the more refined I'm sure the timelines will be. And, good luck to him if he can get us to live healthily for longer periods of time. That's obviously going to be very ideal for the human race, but again, I worry about the issue of overpopulation and things like that. Maybe all these will be resolved as it develops. I don't know. I don't know enough about the science of that to really comment on it, but as science develops, timelines will change. So the fact that he's saying it's within this lifetime is probably his best current estimate. So fair enough.
But even so, what if it's 3150, not 3140, 1,000 years from now? I mean,
won't know
that's
until we
possible.
develop further
But
on it.
you and I aren't going to be here to enjoy it. Why sell it like it's got to happen in my lifetime? Because that always, to me, seems like you're just tickling that part of the brain that religions like to tap in. That sort of egocentric. It's all about me, and I want to continue on in the future. I get that.
Well, and I suppose, if one says that it's going to happen in this lifetime, it encourages funding for, it could be something similar to that. It encourages funding for research to develop it even further. Without that funding, it might take a lot longer. So saying it's within this time period might encourage more people to support that research. Again, I don't know enough about the research. I'm sure Michael Shermer knows a lot more about it than I do, but from the lay kind of perspective, that would make sense.
Of course, I do too, but all the more reason we should be skeptical when the idea on the table being offered to us feels too good to be true. It almost always is. Not always, but usually.
And I've been a victim of that kind of scam as well, especially currency investments. And I have been a victim of scams that are involved with there back when I didn't know what I was doing, and I still don't to some degree. I've only been doing it a couple of years, but if it's too good to be true, it likely is. So it is very easy to fall for these kind of things when something so positive is promised to you within a short time, that it's often not the case. So he's right, you really need to know what you're looking for and what to look out for. And there's hardly anything bigger than offering immortality or the afterlife, because offering immortality, I would argue again, as I said earlier, is not a nice thing. You wouldn't want that in terms of life as we know it. An afterlife, this is one thing that people often confuse when we say that, we believe that you live forever after death, or that you live forever, period, and there is no death. People assume that means life and time as we understand it now, which would be hell. It really would. Again, can you fathom living forever? It's a very long time, with a stronger word than very. It's a long time. Nobody, even though it sounds on the fascia of it, it sounds like an amazing thing. It's not. Conceptually, it's a horrific thing to live forever. But when we talk about the afterlife, we're talking about a nature of time that isn't experienced as time as we know it. I don't know, you'd have to have had some sort of experience of a near-death experience, or many in psychedelic states explain the same sort of thing. I can't really talk to, because I've never had that experience of timelessness, but they say certainly the concept of living forever in that state is not timeless. It is, when they've been there, they say that our conception of time is very unnatural and very weird, and it's, being in that state of timelessness is what we are, and that is more comfortable than it is for us now. So it's difficult to conceptualize. It's like, as I always say, it's like trying to imagine a new color. Unless you've experienced something like that yourself, there's no way of interpreting or explaining what that's like. So in that sense, living eternally outside of time might not be as terrifying as one would assume living eternally on this life is. I wouldn't want that.
So here's the problem. We are all aware that death is real because we see it all around us.
We're aware that physical death is real. What that means for consciousness and mind, we don't know. We can infer that it means that it's the cessation of mind and consciousness because the brain dies. I would argue that it's much more evidenced that it does continue in some way, but we certainly know that physical death is real, and it's perfectly reasonable to infer that means that death of consciousness and mind is the truth. Most of that comes from, I think, ignorance, genuine ignorance of the actual research that's been done, or it could simply be just a different interpretation of that evidence. I might not be right that I think there's more evidence in support of that. I might be completely wrong. I might not have the perspective of the other side enough as much as I should do to really have a mixed bag of what evidence is actually there. But from where I've seen and all the research I've done, I think there is more evidence to the contrary.
100 billion people have lived before us. They're all gone. Not one of them has come back. Not
physically. That's impossible as far as I'm concerned. No person who dies physically can return physically. That's why I'm extra skeptical of the Jesus resurrection. Admittedly, I haven't done any research in that case, but just on the base of it, to be resurrected physically is impossible. Scientifically, physically impossible, unless you invoke a miracle. But at that point, anything's unfalsifiable, because you can say everything's just a miracle, and you invoke magic, and then it becomes non-scientific, and therefore I think not particularly useful to think about. If I see someone actively be reincarnated from a definite dead state, I would change my mind, because when you're personally exposed to something like that, it happened. What can you do about it? But until that time, I consider physical resurrection to be difficult.
Not even Jesus, in my opinion, but that's a different video. And yet, you cannot conceive of what it's like to be dead. Because if I asked you, picture yourself dead, what do you see?
Again, assuming that death is the cessation of consciousness, in which case, how can one imagine what a period of unconsciousness forever would be like? When I fainted in a science lesson, I didn't experience being in a fainted state. I experienced the horrible feeling beforehand, any dreams or anything I would have had in the meantime, which I don't remember. But from what I can remember, it was, God, I feel shit, and now I'm on the floor. Like, there was nothing in between. That period of unconsciousness is not an experience. So imagine that for eternity. Without a conscious experience, how can one imagine what that would be? Because it just simply wouldn't exist. It would be like, trying to look out the window and experience what's happening in the Australian outback to some little rat who lives in the desert in a hole somewhere. For me, in my experience, that doesn't exist. And I can't experience that. It's probably not a good analogy, but you know what I mean. It's the same as having someone who's blind. And you say, well, what do you see? Do you see blackness? Do you see, like when we close our eyes, is that what you see? The dots and the whatever? They say, no, I just don't have sight. You think, well, no, you must see blackness. You've got eyes. They might not work, but you've got eyes. No, I just don't see. The world doesn't exist like that for me, and you can't imagine it.
Most people say, well, I see, myself there at the funeral in the coffin. And
what that means for someone who's blind because they don't have eyes or were born without eyes is different if you're not born blind and then you lose your vision or your eyes or something, because then you have a comparison because you were visually enabled and now you're not. So you probably would see that blackness. I don't know. I'm not blind, and I hope I never will be. But for those who are born without the ability, the perception of sight, they tell you, I don't see black, I don't see anything. Visual doesn't exist for me, and I can't imagine what it must be like for you to be able to see. It's relative, and it's very difficult to get your head around.
My loved ones are, hopefully grieving, and they're right. No, you wouldn't see that. You wouldn't see anything, because to see anything, you have to be conscious. To conceive of anything, you have to be a sentient being. You have to be conscious, and if you're dead, you don't have any of that. You're just.
That's if that's true. I think there's more than enough evidence to suggest that we do retain some sort of awareness and some sort of even individuality after death, based on the evidence that I've seen. So that certainly, if Dr. Shermer's correct, that's right. Because, as I say, even saying you wouldn't see anything is difficult, because you wouldn't have the ability to see. You wouldn't have the ability to comprehend the ability to see, because you don't exist. There's no consciousness. It's like you were before you were born, from the perspective of what you can remember now. We don't know if we existed before we were born. We certainly don't have a memory of it. So from our memory and our understanding as we see ourselves in life now, it's like imagining what it was like before you were born, because we don't have that memory.
Really, death is just nothing. And the whole idea of the afterlife is fairly new. I mean, the ancient Hebrews, their idea of the afterlife was nothing. You're just nothing. You're just gone. That's it. There's no place to go with angels and flowers and whatever. It's just nothing. All that was added on centuries later. And, and probably for socio-political reasons, offer the peasants something nice so that they'll keep building our pyramids.
That's absolutely true. That's one thing I certainly do think about, especially religion, is you offer someone this brilliant, lovely place after death, and you can control them. Because, especially if you add the layer of hell as well, you do this and you'll go to hell, so you have to act in the way that I'm telling you to act to go to heaven. And if you are, as Michael says, if you are promised some sort of nice place after death, you're more likely to, I suppose you're more likely to say, okay, well, whatever, I'll do whatever I'm told to do on this earth, because it doesn't matter anyway, I'll be in this nice place. Which is why I don't agree with religion. To me, a lot of it is very much a blackmail. You don't believe in God, you get sent to hell. You don't go to church every week or whatever, you go to hell. It's blackmail to me, and I don't subscribe to that. But I still think that, religion aside, there is certainly reasonable evidence that at least consciousness seems to continue in a state where the brain should not be able to produce it, which you can infer then, including things like evidential mediumship and remote viewing and parapsychological effects and things like that, that there's more to consciousness than just being a byproduct of brain activity. And from there, you could infer that, well, perhaps there is something to it. Not religiously. I think the religious views of afterlife and heaven and hell and whatever else are fallacious, to put it, simply. But it appears to me that there is something to it.
Or whatever. Again, we can't conceive of what it's like to be dead, and yet we see it all around us, so this creates something of a paradox that we have to resolve in our minds. Most people resolve it by thinking, well, I'm not actually going to die. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to live forever. Or I'm going to accept Jesus or whatever, and I'm going to heaven. But what if you're wrong? That's it's not a Pascal's wager where you can say, well, I have nothing to lose and everything to gain, because which religion and their version of the afterlife is the right one? Which one are you going to pick?
Almost certainly there's errors in all of them, fundamentally. But it's certainly more than possible that there is also truth in all of them. I haven't looked at all of them. I don't know exactly. But I would say, any worldview, religion or philosophy that one holds is certainly, or as close to certainly as one could reasonably say, incorrect or incomplete, because everything is just so complex. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what reality is. So we're all completely wrong. The reality of what life and existence and consciousness and everything actually is going to be so different to anything we have imagined now or have ever imagined in the past, that it's just going to be, like living in a sci-fi environment that no author or filmmaker could even begin to conceive to create. So it'll be interesting, certainly, to see where the world is in terms of our scientific understandings in a couple of centuries or so. Religions will remain the same, but I think that's the key difference between religion and science. Is religion, generally the doctrines of religion are fixed, and observations of the world have to be made to fit into that belief, whereas science, real science, changes and adapts to new evidence that comes. Of course, then you have philosophies within science that to some extent are just as dogmatic as religions are, but to me that's not helpful unless the person that holds those philosophies are open to change as new evidence arises.
Well, the Christians, we're the right ones. Yeah, well, there's 1 billion Muslims who disagree with you. They don't accept Jesus as a savior. They don't think he was even the Messiah or the Son of God. Okay, so now what? They believe just as strongly as you do. So what if your God is the wrong one? Your version is the wrong theory, and they have the right one. You wasted your whole life investing on this idea, and you turn out.
But not only that, the certainty that people have that their religion is correct and that everybody else is wrong creates terrible conflicts between them. And regardless of whether all these religions at their base originally had the same teachings, which I believe they likely did, I don't know enough about it, but all of the teachers of Jesus and the Buddha and whoever else of the other religions were all telling people the same thing, love is key. Love thy neighbour as thyself, and etc., etc. They all said the same thing in maybe slightly different terms and slightly different words or whatever, but effectively they're all saying the same thing, it seems. But now it's been interpreted so many times and changed so often that now if you're not part of this religion, you're the enemy and you're wrong. And this is where all these wars and conflicts come from for something that, for an idea. Even something as simple as, different countries, and if you belong to this country, you're English. If you belong to this country, you're Russian. If you belong to this country, you're Cyprian, and we have to defend our country. You think, well, this is where World War II and everything came from. We want to occupy this land, but countries and lands and are all ideas. In reality, we're all just, this great ape living in the place we happen to be born in, on a rock floating in space. We don't own anything. No land belongs to us. We don't have the right of something just because we named it and lived and were born there. We just happen to be here. And the idea of occupation of land is just creating wars for an idea because we want to own something that we don't own, because if a comet hits us, it doesn't matter what you say you own, everything blows up and that's it. So that was my response to how trying to solve death makes life here and now worse with Michael Shermer by the Big Think YouTube channel. I'll link the original video in the description. This, it seems, was more focused on kind of the hypothetical situation of, what would happen and what would be the state of the world if we were able to live together, and what would be the state of, as I say, the world, but also for an individual faced with that possibility that they can live as long as they like, as happy as they like, until they decide otherwise. I would think, from the way I would picture it, that it would overall be a negative thing in terms of individuality, the mental health issues. I think that kind of, it would be a responsibility on your shoulders would be tremendous, as well as the obvious overpopulation issue that would occur, because people would be living longer as long as they like, and they would still be able to reproduce. At least males, I think, can reproduce for their entire lifespan. Of course, females can't, what with the menopause and all that. For all the women out there, more strength to you for going through that nonsense. I wouldn't want to do it. But, generally, people live longer, there will be more people, of course. So overpopulation would become a big issue, and that would then have impacts on climate and the, more houses having to be built, which would cause an issue to the ecosystem and the wildlife habitats. It would cause a big ripple effect, I think, and it would be just generally not very good, which is why, as frightening and as horrible from a human perspective death is, if we were even to assume that there is no spiritual side of things, it is a very important part of life that does keep things in regulation. So I hope you enjoyed my response, or at least found it useful. As I always say, if you disagree with anything I said, or if you have your own comments on what is he Dr. Shermer? Is it Dr. Michael Shermer? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I never really thought about it. I think he's a doctor. If not, he's a very intelligent guy. If you have any responses to his comments yourself, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.